Welcome to your PTA Standing Rules, a Texas PTA Spotlights workshop. Before we begin, please review the Texas PTA Spotlights workshop, Your PTA Bylaws. Having that information will help you understand your standing rules much better. We are here to provide you with the information you need to know about your PTA standing rules. We will begin with an overview of the rules you must follow as a 501c3 organization and the importance of standing rules. Then, we will look at what's in the standing rules, how you update them so that they will work for your PTA, and how they are approved for your use. Finally, we will tell you about the resources available to you. What laws and rules do you have to follow in your role as a PTA leader? If you have viewed the Bylaws workshop, you will have already gone through this information. Let's take a quick refresher. Keep this in mind. When trying to determine in what order you must follow these laws and rules, just remember federal, then state, then local. Like every individual and group, you will have to follow the laws of the land, which includes federal, state, and local laws. These include all federal regulations, the IRS, which requires you to file an annual Form 990, state laws and regulations, especially those written to cover nonprofits in Texas, any codes for corporations if you are incorporated, laws through the Secretary of State, the State Attorney's Office, the Gambling Commission, and so forth. There may also be applicable local laws you must follow. Some of those rules may be policies of your own school district. Next are the rules of your organization, or our PTA association. We begin with our parent association, National PTA, and those bylaws and policies. Then, we must follow the Texas PTA Articles of Incorporation, bylaws, and policies, which include the standards of continuing affiliation. Then, you must follow your PTA's bylaws, standing rules, and policies. For anything not already covered by that long list, you refer to the adopted parliamentary authority, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. Newly revised means the latest edition, which currently is the 12th edition. You may also have adopted motions, procedures, both written and unwritten, and when all else fails, yes, you can follow the standard tradition for your PTA, the way you've always done it, as long as it doesn't conflict with everything else that preceded it on this list. It's a major benefit of being PTA to know that national and Texas PTAs will help you with the federal and state requirements. We just mentioned Robert's Rules of Order newly revised as the parliamentary authority for PTA. So let's look to it for an explanation of where the standing rules fit in this picture. This excerpt identifies the corporate charter. You received a charter from Texas PTA when your PTA was formed, the Constitution and our bylaws, usually a combined document, rules of order, and standing rules. You may or may not have adopted standing rules, but most PTAs have. Let's look more closely at why standing rules are important. As stated in Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, or RONR, standing rules, as understood in this book, except in the case of conventions, are Rules 1, which are related to the details of the administration of a society rather than to parliamentary procedure, and 2, which can be adopted or changed upon the same conditions as any ordinary act of the society. Standing rules generally are not adopted at the time a society is organized, but individually if and when the need arises. Remember, with bylaws, you will use the template provided by Texas PTA. You will not have the ability to add a lot of additional wording. That's where your standing rules come in. You will provide the details in the standing rules. Your standing rules may be just a few lines in the beginning, but you will add more information as you determine What needs to be documented for your leaders and members today and in the future? Why have standing rules? The standing rules provide the structure of the association. For example, the standing rules can add more information about standing and special committees and their duties. The details not found in the bylaws, since there is not a lot of information that can be added to the bylaws. While your bylaws may only state that you have a vice president of membership, the standing rules will define the duties and the reporting. The standing rules define the additional processes of how the association operates. The financial processes, like authorized signers on the accounts, expense reimbursement and carryover funds, requirements for insurance, awards, and more. The standing rules provide continuity, not only from meeting to meeting, but also year to year. They provide a history of how different processes are handled. Finally, they provide consistency in your association, like the bylaws. For example, if your PTA provides student or teacher scholarships, then the criteria, review, and awards are all documented for transparency and equity. The standing rules contain those specific steps that are followed in the actions your leaders take for daily functions. Here is where you find what expenses are reimbursable, what forms are used, what deadlines must be met to submit expenses, and when reimbursement checks are distributed. Unlike the bylaws, which include specified and consistent wording, the standing rules address the processes that may differ from PTA to PTA. The standing rules do not address parliamentary procedure. In fact, in some cases, they override the parliamentary authority. For example, you may want to adopt a standing rule that limits the time for debate. If you don't have a standing rule, then you would look to Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, which states each person can speak for 10 minutes. You have the ability to adopt a standing rule that limits debate to a shorter time limit, such as 2 minutes per person. Like the bylaws, the standing rules are approved by your members. We'll talk about that process later in this workshop. Remember the hierarchy of governance documents? The standing rules cannot conflict with any document that has a higher ranking. So, the standing rules cannot conflict with your PTA's bylaws or the bylaws of National or Texas PTA or any of their policies or procedures. Also, the wording in the standing rules should never repeat wording from the bylaws. Like the bylaws, you can amend the wording in the standing rules whenever needed. Unlike the bylaws, you can amend any portion of the standing rules. Finally, unlike the bylaws, portions of the standing rules may be temporarily suspended with a vote of the membership. We'll explain more about that later. We've referred to the Texas PTA bylaws template numerous times. There is no template for the standing rules because PTAs do not all function in the exact same way. Your members choose how to spend your funds through the approval of your budget. So, some PTAs may need rules for that line item regarding awards, for example, while others do not. Texas PTA does provide sample standing rules where you can choose the wording that your PTA needs. In some cases, you can take the recommended wording and change it to fit your needs. However, there is other wording that, if used, must be inserted verbatim. One such example would be the wording for scholarships. The majority of this wording comes from the IRS, so for your protection, you must use it exactly as provided. Look to the sample standing rules for a very comprehensive listing of wording to use in your standing rules. On the screen, you can see a list of some of the content provided. Let's look at some of the possibilities. The financial procedures section is quite extensive and includes a lot of guidelines that you can adopt about how your members' money can be spent. The e-commerce procedures, which deal with debit and credit card use and online point-of-sale payments, includes some wording that must be inserted verbatim. For the protection of your nonprofit status, money spent on condolences and memorials must be carefully used so that there is no individual benefit, which is prohibited by your tax-exempt status. While you may have committees, both standing and special, and you have general information about how they function, the specifics about what is expected of the committee chairs, and even what the standing committees are, all belong in the standing rules. Purchasing bonding for your officers and other insurance is recommended, but the type of insurance you buy depends on your needs. You may not have purchased a property like popcorn machines, but if you have, property insurance is a good idea. The standing rules would document what is recommended from year to year. If your PTA presents awards to staff, volunteers, and/or the community, it's a good idea to document the processes about how the recipients are identified, selected, and recognized. Your PTA always wants to be transparent and equitable in these circumstances. Scholarships need to be documented in the same way that awards are. However, since scholarships involve funds, the IRS has some very specific requirements, so this wording is not only recommended, but also required. Normally, the president is the official representative of the PTA, and that includes being the spokesperson to the media. It's a best practice to put that in writing so that there's no question, but also to name another position of someone who will represent the PTA if the president is unable to do so. There could be a number of both ordinary and specific situations that call for your PTA's practices to be in writing. It could be for consistency or for liability protection. This is your PTA's document, so the content is up to you. Remember, according to the Texas PTA bylaws, the bylaws and standing rules must be reviewed and approved at least every 3 years. Here's a quick reminder of the actions you can take and the vote required for approval. Adopt. When presenting the standing rules for approval the first time, only a majority vote is needed. Amend. When you need to change something, amend something previously adopted or approved, you would need a 2/3 vote of the members present and voting if no notice was given, or a majority vote if notice of the change was provided. Suspend. Unlike the bylaws, you can suspend a standing rule for the current meeting if it affects actions taken in that meeting. However, if the rule has any application outside of a meeting, it cannot be suspended. A majority vote would be needed. Now, let's look at when and how you would update or amend your standing rules. When must you amend your standing rules? If Texas PTA adopted a new policy that affected your standing rules. An example would be when, several years ago, Texas PTA removed the requirement that 2 signatures were required on every check. Is this a best practice that can protect your PTA against unapproved uses of your PTA's funds? Absolutely. However, as a policy, it was tying the hands of some PTAs that were having trouble filling positions. As a result, the 2-signer requirement is recommended but no longer required. Your PTA does have the ability to retain that requirement, but it would need to be in your standing rules. Your PTA may amend your bylaws, and that amendment might create a conflict in your standing rules. This would occur if you eliminated a position in your bylaws, but had duties for that position in your standing rules, which would need to be redistributed to one or more other board members. You may need to amend your standing rules if your PTA has changed the way you do things, but your standing rules still show the old procedure. Finally, You may just need to make changes by inserting, striking out, or changing the current wording for many different reasons. How do you update your standing rules if you have not made any changes to the document? Your first question is probably, why would I do that? Remember, you must submit your standing rules for approval at least every 3 years to maintain your good standing status. Let's assume that is the case. However, let's not assume that no changes are needed. So, you would follow the same basic procedure as you would for your bylaws. And you should be reviewing both documents for accuracy and inconsistencies. Appoint a bylaws standing rules committee. Even if you don't believe any changes are necessary, it doesn't hurt to have a fresh set of eyes review them. Have the committee go through the sample standing rules for PTAs for wording relevant to your PTA and confirm no changes are necessary. Review all of the existing wording. Don't just look at the sections you may have concerns with. After taking all of those steps, you should have confirmed that no changes are needed. Use the online link entitled Submit Your Bylaws to submit your standing rules, checking the option No Changes for the bylaws if you have no changes, and the option Update Standing Rules Stamps. They have been reviewed and require no changes for the standing rules on the form. Upload a copy of your standing rules in Microsoft Word format and submit the form. You will receive a copy of your standing rules stamped with the current date, and you will have restarted the clock on the required 3-year review period. If you feel you do need to make amendments to your standing rules, appoint a bylaws standing rules committee. Go to www.txpta.org/standing rules and click on Download a copy of your bylaws. You'll complete a quick form that asks for your school district, PTA name, your name, birth month, and day. On the next screen, you'll see the links to download your bylaws and standing rules. Have the committee go through the sample standing rules for PTAs for relevant wording. Make your changes to the document you received from Texas PTA. Propose the amendments to the Executive Board and obtain their approval. Be sure to give clear rationale as to why the changes are recommended. Remember, the board may approve the proposed amendments as recommended, or they may amend them. After you have the final proposed amendments from the board, provide notice to the members. Present the proposed amendments to the members for their approval. Again, they have the option to amend the proposed changes. Use the Submit Your Standing Rules link at www.txpta.org/standing rules and check the appropriate box for your bylaws and choose the option Changes to Standing Rules. Attach the approved minutes from the membership meeting at which the amendments are approved and your standing rules, and submit both for approval by Texas PTA. You will receive the approved copy of your standing rules from Texas PTA. If there are any concerns about your wording, you will be contacted by a reviewer. In some cases, you may need to go back to your membership with corrections or additional changes. Be aware that the standing rules amendments do not go into effect until you receive the approved standing rules from Texas PTA. There may be times when, in a meeting, it is obvious that a change to your standing rules needs to be made. A motion can be made in a membership meeting by either an executive board member or any member attending the meeting. The chair would follow the normal steps in handling a motion. If approved, use the online form to submit the amended standing rules with the approved membership meeting minutes. After completing a thorough review of your bylaws and standing rules and making the necessary changes, Make sure you look at the Standing Rules Review checklist that is downloadable from the website. Keep these things in mind. Because of the bylaws process, you cannot add details to the bylaws, so those need to be added to the standing rules. Examples would be additional duties for the officers, a listing of the standing committees and their duties, special programs, etc. Think about what is missing in the bylaws that will help your PTA operate more efficiently. The PTA terminology has changed over the years, and if your standing rules were written years ago, some of that terminology no longer applies. For example, there are no longer any area PTAs. Our state PTA event is called Texas PTA Launch, not Summer Leadership Seminar. We are more inclusive and use chair instead of chairman. See a complete list of in the Standing Rules Review checklist. Small words can make a big difference in how your PTA operates. Understand the difference when using these verbs. If you say something may happen, then it is optional. The bylaws use this word when giving the executive board the ability to remove a board member, because we could never provide all of the exceptions in the bylaws wording. May provides flexibility. The word should also provides an option. In most cases, it means that the action is recommended and not required. You will rarely see this word in the bylaws or standing rules, though. The preferred word to use is may. When you use the words must, shall, and will, the action following those words is required. In almost all cases, the word shall is recommended. Make sure your wording is understandable by someone reading it for the first time. Have someone who is not on your board read the wording and confirm that the intent is clear and understandable. Be careful to allow flexibility. If you are too restrictive, then your PTA may be hampered and will be unable to function. Think of all the different scenarios and make certain that you have provided for them. Finally, check for any wording that is required for your situation, such as the e-commerce wording. Complete the document in Microsoft Word and check that none of the formatting, such as the lettering or the numbering of sections, was affected so that it is now incorrect. A final proof is always necessary. We also recommend that you have either a member of your council PTA or your field service representative, FSR, review your standing rules before submitting them to the Texas PTA. Their review can mean the difference between a smooth approval process and one that involves a lot of discussion and possibly another approval by your members. Let's review the steps you must take to get approval from your members to amend your standing rules. Remember, there is more than one scenario to amending your standing rules. Always, a quorum must be present to conduct any business in the meeting. With notice, provide notice at a meeting that occurs prior to the meeting where approval will be requested, or provide the proposed amendments at least 30 days prior to the meeting to approve. Notice must include the exact wording that is being proposed for approval. The recommendation is that for each proposed change, you provide the existing wording, the proposed wording, and the rationale or reason for the change. If without notice, make a motion on behalf of the executive board or a committee and follow the normal process for a motion. Remember, if the motion comes from a group, a second is not required. If the motion comes from an individual, a second is required. What type of vote is required to approve amendments to your standing rules? If notice was provided, a majority vote is required of the members present and voting. If no notice was provided, a 2/3 vote of the members present and voting is required. The process for choosing the correct wording to present to your members, which will also be acceptable for Texas PTA, is sometimes challenging, Asking for help from a member of the Texas PTA Board or your Field Service Representative, FSR, is always recommended. The meeting is over and your members approved the amendments. What's next? Go to the Texas PTA website at www.txpta.org and click on PTA Training and Support, then Governance, and then Standing Rules, or go directly to www.txpta.org/standing rules. Click on the Submit Your Standing Rules link and complete the form. Be prepared to upload a copy of the approved minutes from the membership meeting at which the Standing Rules amendments were approved, and a copy of your standing rules, both as Microsoft Word documents. Why must you submit both your bylaws and standing rules? You may or may not have amended both documents, but they will both still be reviewed and checked for inconsistencies and or conflicts between the bylaws and the standing rules. Your standing rules amendments and bylaws will be reviewed by Texas PTA, and they either will be approved as submitted or returned for further action, which may include further approval by your members. The standing rules will be approved as submitted, approved with editorial changes, or returned for further action by the members. You may receive a call from the reviewer to clarify the intent of the wording, or there may be questions as to whether you correctly follow the procedures for amending your standing rules. If you follow the procedure and your minutes are complete, there should be no questions. Your minutes should accurately reflect the actions taken to approve your standing rules amendments. These membership meeting minutes should state that a quorum was present, proper notice was given at a meeting or distributed through your regular communication methods, and when it was given, the notice, if provided, including the exact wording to be approved, the motion to approve the amendment, naming the maker of the motion, which is normally a board member on behalf of the executive board, the result of the vote and whether approved as presented or approved as amended, the vote required to approve, 2/3 or majority vote, the exact wording finally adopted. Make certain your members understand that any amendments to the standing rules will not go into effect until after approved by Texas PTA. You always want to plan and be prepared for any eventualities. These things could happen. Your members may not approve the wording as you proposed it. They could simply vote against the change or amend it in the meeting. A member may move to send the motion back to committee. This would be a rare instance, but someone might feel that the rationale was not strong enough and may want more information before they take their vote. This would be a motion to refer to committee, which would require a second, is debatable, and requires a majority vote to pass. You may not have a quorum at the meeting, which means you may not be able to conduct any business. However, there are things you can do without a quorum. You can adjourn the meeting and try again at the next meeting. You can recess, which means you pause the meeting for a specified time and try to get the necessary number of members for a quorum to come to the meeting. You can fix the time to which to adjourn or set an adjourned meeting. The motion would be to adjourn to a specific time, like the same time next week, and you can continue the meeting on that date and time. Be aware that Texas PTA does not accept standing rules for approval in the summer. The dates will be posted on the online form. At other times during the year, such as the very beginning of the year or during holidays, the normal 6 weeks processing time may be longer, so you need to plan for those delays. All of this may sound like a lot to remember, but you have a lot of both reference and people resources. You can find a lot of this information in your bylaws and the basics guides for the president and the parliamentarian. You also have access to the national and Texas PTA bylaws, the Texas PTA standards of continuing affiliation, the sample standing rules for PTAs, and the standing rules review checklist, all on the Texas PTA website. Your PTA should have a copy of Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, which can be purchased online and at most bookstores. This is an appropriate expense for your PTA, and it's updated about every 10 years. The current copy is the 12th edition, which was published in 2020. Other resources are available as shown on the screen. Just remember that only Robert's Rules of Order newly revised can be used as the official reference, but the others are great tools for learning. You always have the option to call the Texas PTA or National PTA offices or view their websites. You can also email the Texas PTA Member Services Department, where the bylaws are processed. If your PTA is a member of a council PTA, contact your council PTA president or parliamentarian. And whether in a council PTA or not, your Texas PTA field service representative is always available to assist you. If you don't know who that is, contact the Texas PTA Vice President for Field Service at vpfs@txpta.org. Thank you for watching Spotlights, Your PTA Standing Rules. If you have any questions, please reach out to your council PTA leaders, if you're in a council PTA, or your Texas PTA Field Service representative.